I want to welcome you to the April 6, 2025 message here at Meadowbrook Baptist Church titled, What Will I Do with Jesus? From Matthew chapter 27, verses 11 through 26. I think we all know what a judge does. A basic definition of a judge is a public officer authorized to hear and decide cases in a court of law. A magistrate charged with the administration of justice. He examines, he presides over a court, and hears the evidence, directs the jury if needed, or he himself makes a decision from the bench. He reaches the verdict, which is what is the truth about the matter, having examined all of the evidence. From the earliest times to present history, I would say that for the most part, history holds in high regard those individuals who have served well in rendering just verdicts as judges in courts of law in countries, not just here in the United States, but around the world. When Cass Gilbert designed the U.S. Supreme Court building in 1932, he employed a sculptor by the name of Adolph Weinman to put on the north and south walls of the U.S. Supreme courtroom two friezes, two sculptures that were embedded in the walls on the north wall and the south wall, each of them being 4 or 7 feet high and 40 feet long. Now, the sculptures, the depictions were of 18 individuals who stood for judges and lawgivers throughout history that are greatly respected for their impact on being good judges and enacting good law. They include Menes, the first king of Egypt, who nearly 5,000 years ago laid the foundation for the observance of justice along the Nile River. Another famous judge, of course, was Hammurabi, who established the Babylonian Empire. And there's a famous set of laws called the Code of Hammurabi. As he wrote down, here are the rules of justice, and he ruled by those laws. Of course, the most famous judge depicted lawgiver on that Supreme Court frieze was none other than Moses in the Old Testament, who received God's laws, the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai, and whom we read judged over the people of Israel. And then even under advice, he appointed many other judges underneath him to see that justice was served in amongst the people of Israel. You also have one of the wisest leaders of all times, Judges Solomon, that gave amazing verdicts that people from all over the world came to hear his wisdom and his ability to render a just decision. Others include Lycurgus, the famous judge of Sparta in Greece, and which is important for our law because you look at ancient Greek and places like Athens, where two other people that are depicted on the walls there at Supreme Court, Draco and Solon, who set the pattern for justice and making good judgments in court there in Athens. Confucius is also a individual whose sculpture is part of that big procession of judges through the ages of history that have rendered good judgments or gave examples of how to make wise decisions in reaching a right verdict. Confucius there in China. Of course, you have two other famous establishers of justice was the Roman Emperor Augustus, who, as he set about to be the first Roman emperor, he wanted to make sure that Rome was on a solid foundation when it came to its legal system and how to make good just decisions. Then there's a later emperor called Justinian, who wrote a famous set of laws called Corpus Juris Civilis, the body of civil law. If you get a chance, look at, excuse me, on YouTube or something, I'm sure you could watch a video about the 18 different figures that are depicted, that including Napoleon. I mean, these are not all excellent individuals in all respects, but they had an impact, all of it. Look into that. We see the impact of other judges like the fourth Chief Justice John Marshall, whose decisions were foundational in establishing judicial review. His sculpture is on there. But there are many, many other judges that we could think of in our own country, from John Jay, the first Chief Supreme Court Justice, to William Taft. William Taft was the 27th President of the United States, but also the 10th Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, the only president to also be the Chief Justice. We have many good ones, from John Jay to Sandra Day O'Connor, and we are thankful for good judges that make good decisions. Even though many times they're very difficult, they still do their best to reach a just verdict. And it's not easy. There are also numerous examples, sad to say, of justices, even here in Illinois and throughout the United States, that their justice was not that good. They were not good judges. One particular one was Martin T. Manton, who served for 15 or more years on the Second Circuit Court of U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, but in 1939 was charged with numerous accounts of bribes, where the organized crime there in New York was bribing him, and it is very clear that he obstructed justice as well, and he went to prison. But perhaps the most infamous unjust judge in all of history is none other than Pontius Pilate, before whom Jesus stood there that Friday morning, early in the morning, and whom Pilate knew that Jesus was innocent. He still gave into the crowd. But for the title of our message this morning, I want us to look at what Pilate, this unjust judge, this governor, Roman governor, said in Matthew 27:22, when he asked this important question: "What shall I do then with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" Because even though he was an unjust judge, and knowing he was innocent, Jesus was innocent, Pilate still, we see throughout the four Gospels, he struggled. What shall I do with the one who is called Jesus? Now, his quest was not for spiritual truth or to make a decision that would have changed his life for eternity, but what was he going to do in this situation? But for you and I, as we think about Jesus, what will you do? What will I do with Jesus, who's called Messiah? As we read here from Matthew 27 about the trial before Pilate, verses 11 through 26. It says, "Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, 'Are you the King of the Jews?' 'You have said so,' Jesus replied. And when he was accused by the chief priest and the elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate asked him, 'Don't you hear the testimony they are bringing against you?' But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Now it was the governor's custom at the festival to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time they had a well-known prisoner whose name was Jesus Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, "Which one do you want me to release to you, Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who's called the Messiah?" For he knew it was out of self-interest that they had handed Jesus over to him. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message: "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" asked the governor. "Barabbas," they answered. "What shall I then do with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" Pilate asked. They all answered, "Crucify him." "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and he washed his hands in front of them. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." All the people answered, "His blood is on us and on all our children." Then he released Barabbas to them, but he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. Last week we examined Jesus' arrest there in the Garden of Gethsemane and his betrayal and his arraignment before Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin. We saw the false testimony that was brought forward, how they looked for evidence so that they might put Jesus to death, and how Jesus, though innocent, remained silent until Caiaphas asked him, "I charge you before the living God, tell us whether or not you are the Messiah, the Son of God." And Jesus says, "You said it. I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven at the right hand of the Mighty One." At that, the Caiaphas blew a gasket. He tore his robe and he says, "What need do we have of any more witnesses? We've heard it from himself. This is blasphemy." And then he asked our key question from last week: "What do you think?" And it kind of goes along with our question today: what shall I do with Jesus, who is called the Messiah? What do you think? Now the Sanhedrin said, "He's worthy of death." And they slapped him and they hit him and they said, "Prophesy, who hit you if you are the Messiah?" Of course, the rest of chapter 26, we have Peter's continued three denials. But Matthew 27, verse 1, it says, "Very early in the morning, the chief priests and elders, they gathered together," and they had to do this to make it official. But what were their plans to have so they could have Jesus executed? Then they bound him and they led him to Pilate at the praetorium, at Pilate's palace, or his residence there. Early in the morning, I want to mention the Roman governors and the Roman officials in those days, they typically began their day at daybreak, their legal proceedings. Daylight was burning, so to speak. And so they would begin these proceedings as early as 6 o'clock in the morning. And they bring him to Jesus, and that's where we are here in verse 11. "Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, 'Are you the king of the Jews?'" Now, we learn a lot about Pilate here. The Jews had brought Jesus to him, and they made basically three charges. One, he's subverting the nation. He's a rabble-rouser. He's raising up he's an insurrectionist. Two, he's talking about not paying taxes to Caesar, which was a lie. We know that was a lie. And three, he claims to be the Messiah, to be Christ, the King of the Jews. Now, having heard this claim about Jesus being the King of the Jews, Pilate now knew where to focus, because that was a direct attack against the authority of Rome, that Caesar Augustus was, or at that time now Tiberius was the emperor. There was no room for Jesus to be a king. So Pilate knew how to focus. Pilate was a trained politician. He had been appointed by Tiberius, the son of Augustus, to be the prefect, the governor of Judah in 26 AD. So all this time of Jesus' both ministry, Pilate had been governor. I'm sure he had been aware at some level, of course, of Jesus' activities. Pilate had partly got this position because he was married to Tiberius's niece and Augustus' granddaughter, whose name, according to history or tradition, is Procula. Pilate was not the perfect judge, but he knew what he had before him was something he had to address. He had to take care of it. This claim of Jesus being the king. Now, Pilate, he was an unjust judge. He was far from innocent. He was a thief. He had stolen money from the temple to pay for an aqueduct that he wanted to build it, and he had a large group of Jewish men killed, and he mixed their blood with the sacrifices at the temple. But now, in bringing Jesus, this claim of Jesus' kingship, his hand was forced. He had to do something. And the chief priest and the elders, they have been quite calculating in their charges, because they knew that Jesus, claiming to be king, would not fly. So Pilate addresses this directly. He says, and he looks at Jesus, and right from the beginning, he knew what was up. And he here in verse 11, he asks, "Are you the king of the Jews?" But literally, in the Greek, the word order is this: "You are the king of the Jews?" Question mark. You're the king of the Jews? I mean, Jesus. Perhaps by this we know they've been hit in the face. He'd been punched, beaten already. And it was pretty ragged looking. And Pilate says, "You are the king of the Jews?" And Jesus answered, "You are saying this. You said it. You have said so. You are saying this. You are saying this." From the beginning of Matthew, this question that is now front and center in this hearing before Pilate, is Jesus the King of the Jews? We go back to Christmas time, Matthew 1. We went through the genealogy of 42 generations, beginning with Abraham and then through David, and then all the way down to Joseph, the husband of Mary. Now, all to prove that Jesus was the promised Messiah. The angel spoke to Joseph in a dream, convincing him that the one born of Mary was of the Holy Spirit. And Mary, of course, knew that this was God's son. In chapter 2, we saw how the wise men, the Magi, came looking for the one who is born King of the Jews. And they worshiped him, giving him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Of course, Herod tried to kill him, but was unsuccessful. We see Jesus' public coronation, you might say, at his baptism, when the Heavenly Father said, "This is my Son whom I love, with him I'm well pleased." Throughout Matthew, I've mentioned there's been almost 60 Old Testament quotations that are fulfilled in Jesus. We have seen the proof. Every sign is pointing towards the fact of Jesus being the Son of God, the Messiah, the promised King. In Matthew 16, Jesus asked Peter, or he asked all the disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter said, "You are the what? The Christ, the King, the Son of God, the Son of the living God." Jesus himself referred to himself as the Son of Man, this coming eternal King. And the book is reaching its climax, the trial the question, are you the King of the Jews? Next week we'll see the sign above Jesus' head where Pilate had written, this is the King of the Jews. We come to this important question, what then, if Jesus is king, what does that mean in my life? Is Jesus the king? Is he the Messiah? Is he the promised eternal one that's come as King of the Jews to set up an eternal kingdom? If he is, that makes all the difference. What will I do if that is so? Now, hearing all this, Jesus' accusers, and we find out from Luke 24, Matthew or Mark 15, that his accusers were even more insistent. He's a troublemaker. He's this and that. And Pilate asked Jesus, "Don't you hear all the testimony they are bringing against you?" But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge, to the great amazement, it says, of the governor. Back in Matthew 26, when they were making these false accusations, Jesus remained silent. One of the most amazing things whenever I'm watching it, or it's a curious thing to me, I don't think I've ever met one of these persons, but the court reporter. You're watching the trial on whatever trial it is, and you see that person typing on this little stenographic machine, some kind of fancy typewriter. And sometimes they have a mouthpiece on and they're speaking something. I don't know what they're doing, but they're recording verbatim, and they're trained to record everything that was said. And, if we were to combine all the four Gospels, we get a pretty good representation of some of the things that were said, but each Gospel kind of records different parts of it. But I think the drama that is going on, these accusers of Jesus, they're there too, and they're accusing Jesus, yet Jesus remains silent. It amazes him. It amazes Pilate. But Isaiah 53:7 predicted this. It says, he was oppressed. That is the suffering servant. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. Now, here in the United States, we're familiar with the Miranda rights. We've seen it on TV a number of times. Any popular TV police drama, it says, they're arrested, and the arresting officer says, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. You have the right to remain silent. The Fifth Amendment guarantees people the right not to have to be compelled to testify in order to protect their innocence against self-incrimination. But Jesus remained silent, as he indeed was innocent. He could have protested, yet he remained silent willingly for us, to suffer for us. He made no reply, not even to a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Pilate, this was not Pilate's first political or first judicial rodeo, so to speak. He had many times had men before him, and some of them innocent, some of them guilty, but many of them, probably a lot of them, literally were falling at his knees, pleading and begging for their lives, protesting their innocence, whether they were innocent or not. But to Pilate's great amazement, Jesus remained silent, because he was willing, though innocent, to die for us. What will I do with the one who remained silent? He did not defend himself. He did not try to get out of it, but willingly, though innocent, he remained silent. In all four Gospels, we find Pilate's efforts to release Jesus, or to give them the choice, as he did here. It was his custom at the Passover feast, evidently to give the people a choice of the prisoner that they wanted to release. It's kind of a favor, a gift to them, a crowd pleaser, to to help them in this time of celebration. Pilate asked the question, who do you want me to release to you? Jesus, Barabbas, or Jesus, who is called the Christ? Now, we don't know. Now, here in Matthew 26, in this in the NIV, it has Jesus Barabbas, but you'll see a notation in the earliest manuscripts. They do not have Jesus Barabbas. Now, Jesus was a popular name. Yeshua, Joshua. It wouldn't have been unusual had Barabbas' first name been Yeshua or Jesus, Joshua. It's a common name. Barabbas means son of the Father, Bar Abbas, son of the Father. But how powerful a choice this is. You have Barabbas, the son of an earthly father, as one choice, and we know that he was an insurrectionist. Mark 15 says he had committed murder during the insurrection. There was no question about Barabbas's guilt, nor Jesus' innocence. What will I do with the innocent Son of God who suffered instead of me? Pilate, this early morning hour, 6 o'clock, had, sometimes you never know what's coming at you. I'm sure at the beginning of the day, and here they come. Perhaps Pilate had been forewarned that this was coming his way. I don't know. 6 o'clock in the morning, not everybody was up and moving and going yet, but quickly a crowd gathered, I can guarantee you that. Whether the crowd was summoned by the chief priests and elders to influence Pilate, I don't know, but the crowd gathered, and it says, verse 17, so when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them. Now, can you imagine that system of justice where a judge were to ask the entire courtroom, what shall I do with this guy? Who do you want? Do you want me to release the murderer, Barabbas, the insurrectionist, or this Jesus who's called the Christ? We would be horrified if that were done in today's world. But he gives them the chance to choose the guilty or the innocent. Now, as he's doing this, he asks them, and it says Pilate knew it was, verse 18, it was out of self-interest they had handed Jesus over to him. He gives them this choice because he knows Jesus is innocent. And in John and Mark and Luke as well, I know in John 3 times, Pilate keeps on saying, I find no basis of a charge. He's innocent. He knew here. He says, I know, he knew what was up. Then on top of that, his wife sends him a message. Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal in a dream because of him. As I said, Pilate's wife was a granddaughter of Caesar Augustus. Her word carried a lot of weight. Niece, I think, to Tiberius. A lot has been written throughout Christian history, a lot of speculation, tradition about even her name being Procula. Claudia Procula. We don't know for sure. There's been a lot of speculations. She's been portrayed in movies by everyone from Barbara Billingsley to Angela Lounsbury. She's an intriguing person. In the Bible, if you begin all the way back to the Old Testament or to Genesis, Joseph had dreams. Others in Genesis had dreams. Pharaoh had a dream, didn't he? Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. We have several people having dreams, and God uses dreams to speak to people. In the New Testament, we have Jesus, or the angel speaking to Joseph in a dream, but also to the Gentile wise men, the Magi, in a dream to reveal his will. And God speaks to this woman, Pilate's wife. Says, he's innocent. Now, I would like to have seen the replay of this woman's dream. Was she dreaming of the end judgment? I don't know. What was the suffering? Was it the suffering of hell itself because she had rejected Jesus? We don't know what Procula did, but we know that she had this dream and that she was convinced of the innocence of Jesus. And the Romans, by the way, as well as the Babylonians, you saw it with Nebuchadnezzar, they put a lot of stock. They believed that the gods communicated to them through dreams. And so this dream is communicated to Pilate. The message don't have anything to do with this innocent man. We have to ask the question, as Pilate asked the crowd once again, what shall I do with which of these two do you want me? And they had been prompted by the chief priests and elders to have Barabbas released, but Jesus crucified. What will we do? What will you do? What have you done in regards to Jesus, the innocent one, who died in my place, not just in Barabbas' place, but in your place? You're a daughter of some father, a son of some father. We are all children tracing our lineage all the way back to Adam and Eve, who sinned, and we have sinned. We're guilty. What will we do with the innocent one who died in our place? Which of the two do you want me to release to you? The crowd answered, Barabbas. And then Pilate asked this important question of the day today. What then will I do with Jesus, who is called the Messiah? Now, I don't think he was asking a particular spiritual question. He was asking a procedural question, and it's the question of an unjust judge to ask this mob to go out on the courthouse steps, and the mob that is protesting out there, hey, how should I decide this? What do you want me to do with Jesus? Now, of course, they cry out, crucify him. But this question, what shall I do with Jesus? That's a question you and I need to ask ourselves. And makes all the difference in your life. All the difference. What you do in relation to Jesus Christ. What shall I do with Jesus? Been interesting if there had been a court reporter there that day that's recording all this, or video going. The crowd answered, crucify him. Just a few days earlier, another crowd there on Palm Sunday cried, Hosanna. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the Son of David. Blessed is the King of Israel. But now this other crowd, or maybe it was part of the same crowd, now they cry, crucify him. Crucify him. And Pilate says, why? What crime has he committed? We already know that he knew it, that they wanted him dead because out of selfish interest, they saw Jesus as a threat. And there's a power play going on. He knew Jesus was innocent. And he asked this question, why? What crime has he committed? Our Constitution, the Bill of Rights, amendments, guarantees a presumption of innocence. It's implied. In the 1895 case Coffin versus U.S., the Supreme Court clarified it without a doubt. There's a presumption of innocence in any criminal case. Innocent until proven guilty, and Jesus was proven innocent. Yet they wanted to crucify him, and Pilate asked, why? Pilate didn't need any polling data to see the mood of the crowd. He saw that there was going to be an uprising, and he was an unjust judge. He's not on the wall of the Supreme Court there in Washington, D.C. And so to try to maybe feign his own shock, or his trying to absolve himself from any particular legal entanglements, he has some water, a bowl of water brought to him, or maybe it's poured over his hands. He washes his hands and says, "I'm innocent of this man's blood." Was he? Was he innocent? Absolutely not. Famous painters from Rembrandt to Albert Dürer have all painted this thing of Pilate washing his hands. Back in the Old Testament, Deuteronomy 21 and Psalm 26, also Psalm 73 is mention of the washing of hands to show innocence in the matter. Other countries, other cultures this is a common, has been in some cultures, a common demonstration of innocence. But was Pilate innocent? He was trying to wash his hands in the matter. There's a painting I saw one time, I couldn't find it as I was preparing this, with Pilate. He's in hell and he's washing his hands, trying to get the blood off, but the blood's on his hands. He was guilty. In fact, we're all guilty. The Jewish crowd, they said, his blood be upon us and our children. They were not innocent. We're all guilty sinners. But it's back to that question, what will I do with Jesus, who is called the Christ? The chief priests, the elders, they rejected him. You know, what did Pilate's wife wind up doing? We don't know. You know, traditions, many traditions have Pilate's wife becoming a Christian. We don't know that. You know, Pilate released Barabbas, and he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. In 39 AD, in 36 AD, Pilate was, he had made a major misstep and was recalled to Rome as a failure, basically. In 39 AD, history records he ended his own life. There's probably a pretty good chance Pilate, though he knew Jesus was innocent and died in the place of a guilty man, he never trusted in Jesus. I hope that's not you. You're listening to this message right now. I hope that's not you. I hope that you will admit to Jesus that you're a sinner. You believe that he died on the cross for your sins and rose from the dead, and that you'll give your life to him. You'll thank him for dying in your place. You receive his gift of forgiveness. What about Barabbas? I've also thought about Barabbas. You know, what did he do with Jesus, who's called the Christ? I mean, I wonder if Barabbas, did he just take off, or did he watch from afar as Jesus died on the cross that was meant for him? I wonder. But I don't have to wonder about this. I know that Jesus died on the cross that was meant for me. What will I do with Jesus? I can tell you what I did with Jesus. When I was 7 years old, I accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior. I confessed and gave my life to him. What about you? What will you do with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?